And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and this time it's kind of a semi-sequel to last week's episode, which was Popular Comics is Okay Not to Like, in which I kind of just veered into talking about Garth Ennis and why I didn't like some of his comics and I did like some of his comics. And so as promised, today I'm going to talk about some of the best comics Garth Ennis has ever written. However, to talk about this, I'm going to have to provide a little bit of background context. First things first, this is a series called The Crossed. You have probably not heard of it because it's not very well known. However, if you have heard of it, you will have unlikely to have ever heard anything positive about it. It's generally viewed quite poorly by the comic book community. Now, the first thing to keep in mind is this is published by a publisher called Avatar here, which is a small, I don't want to say independent, but a small niche publisher, much smaller than Image. So you have like Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, so on. Avatar is a very, very small publisher that mainly does stuff that people, I think, would view as being not safe for work content. So things that are extremely violent or extremely sexually explicit and so on. And The Crossed kind of really defines that and sets that benchmark for them. We're going to talk more about them in other videos that I do in the future because there are a few gems amongst Avatar, although a lot of Avatar is really, really bad. So what I want to talk about today is the series Cross. Now, I'm not recommending the entire series Crossed by any means. It's about 100 issues. In fact, it is issue 1 up to issue 100. And then after that, there's a various set of spin-offs, which I'll talk about momentarily. What's worth noting is that Cross as a series originally started with a pretty self-contained 9-issue series written by, of course, Garth Ennis, as per the thumbnail. Now, what is Crossed about? It's easy to call it a zombie story, but it's not really, because it's not about people who've died and come back to life. It's just about people that have been infected by something. So in that sense, it's nothing at all like the slow zombies we're used to from The Walking Dead. And it's a bit more similar to the fast zombies that we're used to, for example, from I Am Legend or from 28 Days Later. However, it's really neither of those, because it's kind of a third thing where it's not about zombies who just have a hunger for human flesh and chase humans down. It's about zombies that, rather than hungering to eat people, although they are up for doing that as well, really are just about causing like horrific damage to people. It's about evil. It's about people that have given in to their most evil urges. Crossed as a whole, or The Cross, so you can see them here. They call The Crossed because they have this like weird cross-shaped rash on their faces. The Cross as a whole basically will murder, cannibalize, rape, torture, set on fire, maim, just horrific things. Everything they do is incredibly violent and incredibly sexually explicit, and just really absolutely not safe for work. Now, as I flick through these various issues, these various trade paperbacks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about it, have it on a page, and then take a moment and then turn the page, find a safe page I can then have on screen and then talk about it again. Not because I'm worried about my channel becoming demonetized. The channel is not a monetized channel, but simply because you might be interested in the video, but you don't necessarily want to have an image of someone getting torn in half and having their head smashed in by a torn off monkey penis whilst other people are raping or eating parts of their body. I mean, it's pretty grim. So, let's get straight into it. So this is The Crossed, written by Garth Ennis. Already pretty violent from the get-go, as we can see. The first collection, the first 9 issues, is very good. It's very smart, it's very clever, it's a different take on the zombie genre, and whilst it leans a lot into the violence and the sex and the gore, and it really lets Garth Ennis indulge that entire side of himself more than any other series he's ever written, it still somehow manages to keep it in check. If you're a fan of things like The Boys, if you can imagine the most grotesque scenes in The Boys, it's that in this constantly. However, what I said in last week's video is one thing I don't like about Garth Ennis is his obsession about blaspheming about religion in what I find to be quite a puerile adolescent way. That's purely me. And also the fact that he kind of has a lot of reactionary stuff against capes and superheroes, which he sort of leans into, sort of doesn't. The Boys works well because he leans into it 100%. The whole comic is about how much he hates superheroes, and that works fine. At least commit to it. The Crossed has nothing about superheroes, and it has nothing about religion. And in that sense, it's just solid, good writing. Pretty explicit and disturbing and mental, but in that sense, it's much more similar to something like his Punisher Max series. Right? Definitely don't want to show that page. Yep, okay. So, Would I recommend this? Yes, I would recommend it, with obviously a major content warning that this has got loads of really violent, disgusting, depraved, just crazy stuff in it. Now, this is a 9-issue series that is recommended. It's available as trade paperback. It's available as a standard size hardcover. Obviously, I have the trade paperback here, and it is a good read. You have to fortify yourself slightly to read it. The Crossed is a 100-issue series. The first 9 issues were done by Garth Ennis, and then it sold so well, and it was kind of so successful, at least for a small publisher like Avatar, that they kept it going. And I think David Lapham picked it up from there, and then David Hine, and then a bunch of other writers have picked it up at various points. Garth Ennis does come back into it, which we'll talk about in just a second. But it ran as 100 issues, and then there were a couple of spin-off series. There was a series called Wish You Were Here, which I think was a webcomic, but has since been collected in 6 or 7 trade paperbacks. That's pretty good. And then there's a few other random spin-offs and bits and pieces. And then it continues like 100 years later with a series called Crossed 100. Interesting thing about that is that's written by Alan Moore. So if you're an Alan Moore fan, I am not an Alan Moore fan, but if you are an Alan Moore fan, you might be interested in reading that just for completionist's sake. Got to be careful with the page turns. Some of these pages, you have no idea how grim and not safe for work they are. I did actually read this on a train once, and I started unintentionally making the people around me extremely uncomfortable, so I stopped reading. That's a learning experience. So these first 9 issues are Garth Ennis just being Garth Ennis, and it's good. You've probably not heard of The Crossed, but I would recommend reading this if you're a Garth Ennis fan. If you have heard of The Crossed and you've heard nothing but negative things, which is really the cut and thrust of this video, then I would recommend giving this first arc a try, although as you can see it's pretty crazy. Okay, I'm just going to leave it there. So that's the first arc, the Garth Ennis collection 1. What I want to talk about, however, is actually when Garth Ennis returns to the series, like 20 or 30 issues later. So he returns in this, which is called Crossed Badlands, which is when it carries on from issue 10 onwards, basically. Now, this is trade paperback number 6, as you can see there. And obviously a pretty grim and disgusting cover. The first 4 issues of this are written by Garth Ennis. This is him returning to the series. And yes, please don't be pedantic. I'm aware there's a couple of other issues that I haven't shown that he does write in amongst the other trades, but let's not worry about those. The important thing is he returns here for a 4-issue arc called The Fatal Englishman. The rest of this, so in fact the majority of this trade collection, is actually written by someone else. Hang on. So yeah, basically from here onwards, man, look at that. All this is written by other people and isn't very good. I have thought about at some point getting this sliced down and getting it custom bound, but unfortunately I don't really want to show this to my binder, because I think he'll look at this and then be like, I don't really want to do things for you anymore, which I would completely understand. So anyway, the first 4 issues here, The Fatal Englishman, it's about 4 people wandering around the crossed world in the UK. One's English, one's Irish, one's Scottish, one's Welsh. They're given racially problematic nicknames, but I guess one can understand that this is what they refer to each other as, with kind of a humorous, banterish kind of dialogue with one another. Now, I've just said earlier that I quite prefer Garth Ennis when he's not talking about religion and not trying to be anti-superhero. That said, I immediately gave an example of when I enjoyed him being anti-superhero, which was The Boys. And now I'm going to give an example of when I enjoy him being anti-religion. So in this particular arc of 4 issues, what happens is they basically come across a preacher, this dude, who is protecting a bunch of kids, and they basically just protect him for a bit and then go off and do their own thing. It's really interesting though. It's very dialogue heavy. It's a very interesting story. I'm just going to try and find the bit that here we are. The bit that really sold it for me, that I was just like, whoa, this is next level, is one bit, quiet, just dialogue. They're sitting in a room, they're talking. It's one of the soldiers talking to the priest about the nature of evil. And just, the conversation is fantastic. It's just so well written. It's very easy to forget that Garth Ennis is a really, really good writer, especially when he loads himself to this kind of adolescent, puerile, penises and feces and boobs sort of storyline, which he does quite a lot, and The Crossed superficially is that, but it does lend itself to these extremely powerful moments. Let's have a look at this one, which I absolutely love this bit. So only atheists aren't affected. You don't see a little problem there. No virus relies on prior intellectual choice, Padre. You know that isn't what I mean. So what do you mean? That the origin of the infection might just lie in the part of the human brain driven to worship thin air, and to ask for its backing in doing the unspeakable. I mean, it's just powerful dialogue. It's just interesting concepts. And so what I would say, and it does talk a lot about religion, which I said in earlier part of this video and in my last video talking about why I don't like the comic Preacher, but it does it in a much cleverer way. It's not puerile, it's not stupid, it's about intelligent dialogue. And I know I literally say those words and then flick the page and you've got people like pulling out their penises and like stabbing other people and ripping off their heads and all sorts. I understand the dichotomy in what I'm saying, and that I think is why this has not been considered to be a good comic. This is why there is a general trend of believing that The Crossed is all terrible, and most of it is. So The Fatal Englishman is that arc there. Then you get into arcs written by other people, and I'll be honest, the vast majority of these are just short, meretricious, stupid arcs written by people who are just writing about gore and gang rape and prostitution and incest and cannibalism and arson and mutilation and torture, and the list just goes on. And the people have got those stories and they've written them and they're easy to fit into the Crossed universe, so that's what they've done. I read them all, and it was just like a long litany of man's inhumanity to man. It was just pretty grim. And then we got to this. This, ladies, gentlemen, and others, is the best comic Garth Ennis has ever written. For DC, for Marvel, for anyone. This is the greatest Garth Ennis comic ever. And if you're a Garth Ennis fan, you owe it to yourself to read this. This is volume 10. I don't know if you can see that. Volume 10 of the series Crossed. It's quite hard to get hold of. It's called The Thin Red Line, and it is set as a prequel to the rest of the Crossed. It's set when the Crossed infection actually breaks out, so even before issue 1. As you can see here, Thin Red Line is 6 issues by Garth Ennis. This, I think, is indicative of what I'm talking about. It's easy to forget how good at prose Garth Ennis is until you read some of his prose and you just remember what separates him from the other much more meretricious writers that have been writing the Crossed when he's not around. He ran from the terror of his own laughter. How is that as an opening line? I mean, come on. It snapped at his heels like a cur, and simultaneously seemed a thing alive inside him, curdled in his belly, ready to come boiling out at any instant. He ran from the awful sadness of his wife's expression in that last pathetic instant as she hammered at him uselessly, shattered wrists making empty mittens of her hands. And he ran from the voice at the base of his skull, new like shining steel yet ancient as a dagger, that smirking hiss that made the things it made him do feel like their own reward. He ran from it. He ran from it, but he thought he knew its name. How is that as an opening page? Like, if anyone ever says to you, oh, the Crossed is all like cannibals and rape and murder and that sort of stuff, just remember this. When Garth Ennis came back in, he showed everyone how to write a Crossed issue. This takes a huge amount of boldness as a writer and a lot of courage to rely just on 5 short paragraphs as a full opening page. And then it continues, and it's just dialogue heavy, and it is just staggering. As always, as no doubt you know from my channel, I give out basically no spoilers, so all I will say here is these 4 characters recur. They're the ones from this story here, so it's the Englishman, the Irishman, the Scotsman, the Welshman. That is not the start of a joke, that's just who they are. And it's about them, and it turns out they're actually the private security for the UK Prime Minister when the outbreak first comes out, and it starts in the UK. As you can see, we're looking at dialogue, we're looking at conversation, we're looking at exposition and characterization. It is staggering. There's no anti-religious aspect to this. There's no anti-superhero aspect to this. This is Garth Ennis doing what Garth Ennis does well. This is what he does perfectly. This is the things that made Punisher Max so great, just distilled and rarefied into utter perfection. As far as I'm concerned, this is the greatest Garth Ennis comic ever written. I haven't read all of his comics, obviously, but I've read quite a lot of them, and I will stand by this. I'm not going to show you much more than I've already shown you, other than, hang on, what an image, what an image. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to show you much more. I'm not going to talk about it much more other than to say I think the important thing to do is to read this if you're a Garth Ennis fan. Make up your own mind, of course. I'm just telling you my opinion. But what I will say is that reading this in isolation just does not work. To really get the full depth of this, you need to read the story before, the Englishman story. What's it called again? The Fatal Englishman. You need to read that to understand this. You don't have to, but you're doing yourself a disservice if you just read this. And if you're reading this, it's clearly because you're a Garth Ennis fan, so why would you not read the other Garth Ennis thing? But then to really get that, and to get The Fatal Englishman, you really need to read The Start of the Cross, so the original volume. So I guess this is a high ask, but hey, if you've liked my opinion, and if you're interested in Garth Ennis, then hopefully this is enough to convince you. Check this out. To check it out, what you need to do is you need to pick up Crossed Volume 1, which you will not regret. If you're a Garth Ennis fan, you will enjoy this. And then after that, you should pick up Volume 6 and read the first part of it. And then after you read that, then you're ready to read this, which is, in my opinion, the greatest Garth Ennis comic ever written. It's far, far better than Preacher, far better than Hitman. I talked about those last week and explained why I didn't like them. It's far better than The Boys, but it is very different. It's not this kind of analysis of superhero culture and pop culture and that sort of stuff. It's a completely different thing. It's about the nature of man and the nature of humanity. And in that sense, I guess the most similar thing to it, I guess, is Punisher Max, but this knocks that out of the park as well. You might find everything I'm saying hard to believe because you've either never heard of The Crossed, I don't blame you, and if you've never heard of it and I just explained what it's about, you're like, that sounds grim. That sounds like the worst, kind of most puerile thing ever. Yep, you're right. All the other issues, and there's hundreds of them, are generally like that. But these are diamonds amongst all that swell. If you have heard of The Crossed, you've probably got a raised eyebrow and you're like, yeah, I don't really believe you, Thomas, because ultimately everything I hear about The Crossed is that it's terrible. Everything I hear about it is that it's just designed for like puerile, ridiculous incels, and it's just a violence and misogyny and rape and just it's just the worst possible kind of writing you can possibly imagine with really gratuitous artwork. Yeah, that's why it's an unpopular comic, and that's why I wanted in this series to highlight some of the diamonds in there which aren't just good. If you're a Garth Ennis fan, some of the diamonds, especially that one there, is the best Garth Ennis comic that you're probably ever going to read. Absolutely staggering stuff. Cool. I've waxed lyrical for a little while longer than I thought I was going to. I hope this all made sense. I hope you enjoyed it. Keep an eye on Avatar and Avatar's Enable. Shoot me any questions if you want in the comments or on Twitter. But I'm probably going to do a couple of other Avatar videos because there's a few other series that, amongst the general kind of bizarre, not safe for work content that is Avatar, there's a few other series that actually are really, really good and highly, highly recommended. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at I am Thomas Judge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.